As we turn our attention to the offseason, there are some key needs that the Jets need to fill in the draft and free agency. But it's not as simple as just signing any old running back or any old wide receiver. Let's talk key Jets needs and how they can fill them today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, February 18th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. On today's show, we're going to talk about key needs that the Jets need to fill this offseason. But I think sometimes when we talk about filling needs, we get tunnel vision because we only talk about what positions are the Jets weak at, what positions do they need to sign players at. And of course, that's one element of needs. But there is another element, and that's filling specific roles on your team. And there are certain roles that can be filled by players at multiple positions, which brings me to the first need that I think the Jets have this offseason. And that's simply to add more speed to this offense. Now, the Jets offense was not good in 2024, and there were many reasons for that. We can discuss the decline of Aaron Rodgers at the top of the list. But one thing that kind of flew under the radar when we talk about reasons the Jets only had the 24th ranked offense is this was an offense that was very horizontal. And what I mean by that is the Jets really struggled to produce big plays. In fact, there were only 5 teams in the entire NFL that averaged less than one 30-yard play per game, and the Jets were one of them. The Jets only had 15 plays that went for 30 yards or more. And their biggest big play threat kind of regressed in that area this past year. A season after Breece Hall produced 7 plays from scrimmage that went for 30 yards or more, he only had 3 this year. And that was part of the story when we talk about Breece's struggles. I think any assessment of Breece Hall's season would be that he was not as good as people were hoping he'd be in the preseason. And it's difficult to say exactly why. I mean, there are any number of reasons behind that. I mean, look, it's not that Breece Hall certainly wasn't the only Jet who was a little disappointing in his performance, but one of the things that was really lost was the big play element in Breece's game because he went from producing 7 in 2023 to 3 in 2024. In fact, the Jets offense, you remember how bad that Jets offense was in 2023. Jets offense in 2023 produced more 30-plus yard plays than they did in 2024. Now, Jets offense was better on a play-to-play basis. They were better at moving the chains in 2024. It was a better overall offense, but they were not producing splash plays. And it's really hard in the NFL to consistently put together long drives. In fact, if you look at the great offenses in this league, typically what you're finding is they're the offenses that are best at producing splash plays because what's easier to do? Produce 170-yard gain in one play, or produce 10 straight plays where you gain 7 yards apiece. Eventually, if you ask an offense, no matter how good, no matter how talented the quarterback is, no matter how talented the skill players are, to produce 10 straight plays, somebody's going to slip, somebody's going to commit a holding penalty, someone's going to commit a false start, quarterback's going to miss on a throw, someone's going to miss a block. It's inevitable. It doesn't matter how good you are. The guys on the other side are pretty good also. And at some point, you're going to make a mistake. It's really important to produce big plays. And that's something that really held the Jets back on offense this past season. Now, admittedly, part of the issue was Rodgers. If you watched him through much of the season, he was a guy who was not willing to stand in the pocket. And I think that got a little bit better as the season progressed. I think once we got to December, he was a little bit more willing to hang in there and deliver the ball down the field. But through much of the season, Rodgers was rattled when another team's pass rush provided footsteps near him. And he was quick to dump the ball off. He had one of the quickest times to release in the league. His average yards down the field per attempt was about as low as it's been in his career. His rate of throwing deep passes was about as low as it's been in his career. But there also was just a lack of an overall big play threat on the offense once we got past Breece Hall. You look at the 2 rookie backs the Jets had. Braylon Allen, a guy who's more of a thumper. Isaiah Davis, a guy who runs hard. How many big plays can you expect out of him? That's unclear. You look at the group of receivers the Jets had. Garrett Wilson's an outstanding receiver, a guy who certainly the offense should be built around, a guy who should be part of the picture for a long time going forward for this franchise. But, Garrett, despite, you might remember he had a very fast 40-yard dash time when he participated in the NFL scouting combine in 2022, but his game's not as a straight line burner. He's more of a possession kind of guy, more of a move the chains kind of guy. He's a guy who can be dangerous with the ball in his hands. He's a guy who can make people miss, a guy who has as good a change of direction ability as you'll see in the league, and that manifests itself in his route running. It manifests itself after the catch, but not a big play threat. Devontae Adams, I think we know he's not coming back. Devontae Adams is still a very productive receiver, really smart, can read coverages, understands where to find the soft spot in the defense, but obviously on the wrong side of 30. 32, heading to his 30, he's not going to be back, so it doesn't really matter. He's heading to his age 33 season. Not a guy who's going to produce a ton of big plays, or at least as many big plays as he used to in Green Bay. You'll see it occasionally, and look, Adams is at the stage of his career where he's not quite what he used to be, but still very good, but was not able to produce a lot of big plays. So Jets need to add speed to their skill position group. Now, typically where you do this is the wide receiver position. The wide receiver is a position where you want a big play threat. But there are other spots you can do it. Would the Jets be willing to, maybe break up this running back group? Breece Hall is obviously going to be in the mix, and Breece Hall, to the extent the Jets have a home run hitter on offense, it's Breece. But maybe would they put another home run guy behind Breece and relegate either Allen and or Davis to a lesser role? Or maybe, could you fulfill the dream of every NFL franchise? Can you find a deep threat at the tight end position? There aren't a lot of people like that out there in this league. You kind of have to be lucky to hit on one. And I know the Brock Bowers fans are going to be screaming when I mention this. But can you find somebody who could be a mismatch for linebackers, for safety, somebody who can get down the field, down the middle at the tight end position? It doesn't, and this is the thing when we talk about needs, it doesn't really matter which group this comes from, but one thing is clear, that the Jets need to produce more big plays in 2025 than they did in 2024. I think one of the things that kind of flew under the radar with the Jets' offensive struggles was just how hard it was for this team to produce splash plays. This team was really confined within a box on offense. I mean, it felt like the field was kind of capped for this group, and that, as much as anything else, put this team in a tough spot. And look, it was true when the Jets fell behind in games, because when you fall behind in games, that's when you really need to hit the home run. And the Jets just were not capable. Now, part of this is going to be internal. You hope Breece bounces back. You hope he's closer to the guy who produced 7 30-yard plus plays than the guy who produced 3. That would obviously be a big boost, but it can't just fall on Breece. Other guys need to step up, and the Jets probably are going to need to find another threat or two, somebody who can hit the home run ball for them, because it's just a critical part of NFL offenses today. And if you don't have it, you put yourself behind. I think that there's a clear correlation between the Jets' lack of ability this year to hit the home run and their 24th ranked scoring offense. Not a coincidence. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the other side of the ball, the guys who try and prevent the 30-yard plays. The Jets are very good at one specific premium position on the defensive side of the ball. There are 3 starters at this position, and all 3 of them have been excellent for the Jets through the years. But one of them is about to hit free agency, so the Jets may need a new sidekick at this position. We'll go into more detail on this as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because with FanDuel, you can place live bets through the game. So even if you missed the opening tip or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you could stay in on the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. You'll love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're backing your team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, you'll never feel like you missed your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. We're talking about offseason needs today for the New York Jets, but we're looking at it in a different way. It's not just about which positions are the Jets weakest at. It's about which critical roles need to be filled. Now, if you're looking at needs in a normal sense, I don't think you'd say cornerback would necessarily be at the top of the list for the New York Jets, because you have Sauce Gardner, who 2 of his 3 seasons in the NFL was a first-team All-Pro. You also have Michael Carter II, who is an excellent slot corner. Now, you kind of have to throw out what happened in 2024 because both of them kind of had down seasons. Although I feel like maybe we're a little too hard on Sauce because his coverage stats were still pretty good. Maybe they weren't quite at the level, at the standard he put up in 2022 and 2023, but that shows you in part how high the standard was that he put up in those 2 years. His coverage stats were actually still pretty good in 2024. His issue was tackling, and you hope that improves moving forward. Michael Carter II, played through some injuries this past season. I think you might look back at that season. I've kind of examined things. I was hard on him during the season, but I feel like he was playing through some stuff. And for me, it's really tough to get on Jets in the 2024 season. Guys who have been good players in the past, from the standpoint that everybody struggled. We know the season really fell apart, and we know the reasons the season fell apart. And some of it had nothing to do with the players themselves. A lot of it, some of it may have had to do with the coaching and impulsive decisions made by ownership regarding the coaching. So, 2 of the 3 starting spots at corner, Jets are looking pretty good. If we presume Sauce Gardner is going to bounce back, and if we presume Michael Carter II is going to be healthy and bounce back, and I think these are fair things to have confidence in, because these are both really good players. These are guys who I think are part of the core of the team going forward. So when you're good at 2 of the 3 spots, is it that significant to have another good starting corner? Well, I think it might be for the New York Jets. And I say this in a way I may not have said it if the Jets had hired a different head coach, but Aaron Glenn's coming in. Aaron Glenn likes to blitz. Steve Wilks is his defensive coordinator. Steve Wilks likes to blitz. Now, I know some people will look at Steve Wilks' last defensive coordinator job with the San Francisco 49ers in 2023, and the Niners did not blitz a lot that season. And that's a fair point. But the Niners tend to not blitz much. And Kyle Shanahan, although he's known as an offensive coach and doesn't seem super hands-on with the defense, there's a type of defense he wants run. And part of the reason Wilks was fired, despite his team being very successful statistically, was if you follow what happened, Wilks is in his heart is a guy who likes to blitz. That's the way he was when he ran defenses on his own. And when you blitz, that means you play a lot of man-to-man coverage, because when you only rush 4, you can play zone, because you can break the field, the coverage zones, and divide it among 7 guys. You're only rushing 4, you have 7 guys in coverage. So breaking the field into 7 zones is not that hard. You're not asking guys to cover too big of an area. You blitz, you ask guys to cover 6 zones. That's a lot. It does happen. It's known as a fire blitz. That's, if you ever hear the phrase fire, it means that you're blitzing, but you still play 6 guys back. You blitz, if you blitz 6, you only have 5 guys back. Essentially, you're playing man to man. So when you blitz, you're playing man to man much more frequently. And that means you got to have guys who can cover man-to-man, because a man-to-man defense is only as good as its weakest link. There's somebody out there who can't cover. The other quarterback, when he sees a blitz, he's going to be looking to the receiver being covered by the guy who can't cover. I know that's a bit of a play on words, but your weakest link at the corner position can really hurt you. There are a lot of people who will tell you that on the defensive side of the ball, there's no position that loses you games quicker than with bad play than corner. On the offensive side of the ball, obviously quarterback's at the top of the list, and you could talk about left tackle or other offensive line spots. But on the defensive side of the ball, you have a guy who can't play corner, you're going to be in big trouble. And the Jets have DJ Reed hitting free agency. And it's really tough to get on DJ Reed for anything he did. Now, the second half of 2024 was not great. Maybe he was showing some signs of decline. Entirely possible. A guy who depends a lot on his athletic ability and a guy who is approaching 30 years of age. We could be having a debate on how wise it would be for the Jets to pay him this coming off season, but it sounds, Reed was a guy who was pretty vocal near the end of the season about wanting to leave. Now, one of the things we've discussed on the show in recent weeks is whether or not maybe the addition of Aaron Glenn as head coach could change his mind. Glenn was a very popular hire among a lot of Jets players. Was Reed one of them? We don't know. We'll probably find out over the next couple of weeks when Reed has to make his decision. But under the assumption Reed does not return, that number 2 corner spot, I think, is one the Jets are going to need to prioritize because this is becoming a defense. The center of the defense is shifting for the Jets. Under Robert Saleh, it was the defensive line because Saleh was the type of coach. He came from that San Francisco tree. He ran that type of defense Kyle Shanahan wanted, where you primarily are rushing 4 guys. And when you're only rushing 4 guys, your defensive line has to be talented. And you saw the Jets invest a lot in their defensive line in the 4 years Robert Saleh was here. For much of the time, it was successful. In 2024, they made a lot of very bad decisions. They made a lot of very bad investments, most notably Hassan Reddick. But the investments were still there because, and this is the best way to think about it. When you're only rushing 4, your defensive line's at a disadvantage because they're rushing 4 and the offensive line has 5 offensive linemen. So you're going 4 on 5. In the meantime, your coverage unit has the advantage because you have 7 guys back against 5 eligible receivers. So your coverage unit's 7 on 5. When you blitz, the math changes. When you blitz, you're 5 on 5. So it's about an even matchup, but it puts more stress on the coverage unit. Coverage unit is still 6 on 5, but that's tougher than 7 on 5. And you could be 6 on 5. Most of the time when you blitz, you are going to, there are those fire zones, but most of the time you're going to play man-to-man with 1 safety back. And essentially your 6 on 5 becomes 1-on-1 across the board with a safety back to prevent catastrophe. So it's really important to have a quality number 2 corner. Now, question is do the Jets have that guy internally? Could it be Quantez Stiggers, a guy the former Jets regime was quite high on after drafting him out of the CFL a year ago? I don't know that that's the guy you can bet on. I think the Jets are going to have to look probably outside the organization to find a quality number 2 corner. Now, will you find somebody as good as DJ Reed? Probably not. DJ Reed was a phenomenal signing by Joe Douglas. Joe Douglas did some bad things during his tenure, certainly. Joe Douglas did not live up to the hype, but Joe Douglas made some excellent moves during his tenure, and DJ Reed was one of those excellent moves. DJ Reed was an outstanding corner. I think for much of his tenure, he played like a number 1 corner, and the only reason he wasn't the number 1 corner was that the Jets had a corner, it had like a top 3 corner in Sauce Gardner. But replacing DJ Reed's going to be no easy task, but believe it or not, even though you have Sauce, even though you have Michael Carter II, that second corner spot, I think, has to be a priority for this team this offseason when we talk about roles that probably have to be filled from the outside. That's one the Jets should certainly keep their eye on and focus on as they build their team through the offseason. Now, head on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to a spot on the field which is critical, but the Jets actually have handled it pretty well. There's one piece of the puzzle left, though, on the offensive line. And to fill that piece, I think the Jets need to go for a certain type of player. We'll talk about what style of player they need in that spot as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We're talking about some key roles that the New York Jets need to fill as we head into the 2025 offseason. Now, we do a little callback to yesterday's show. On yesterday's show, if you missed it, and please feel free to check it out after you finish listening to this episode, we discussed reasons Jets fans should be optimistic about this team because there's a lot of pessimism in the fan base right now, and it's totally understandable. Jets have the longest playoff drought in the league, and their playoff drought is twice as long as these 2 teams tied for second place right now. Jets have the Jets have not made the playoffs in 14 years. There are two teams that have a 7-year drought who are tied for second at the moment. And the Jets are also coming off a very difficult season, one of the most disappointing seasons, not just the Jets have had, but any team has had in recent memory. So fan base is frustrated, but there are reasons for optimism. We discussed them yesterday. Among them is the Jets' offensive line is actually in pretty good shape for the first time in quite a while. And that's particularly true as a pass blocking unit. The Jets really have 4 of the 5 positions set. We can pretty much pencil in 4 of the 5 starters. We can pencil in Olu Fashanu at left tackle. And now with about half a year of starting experience under his belt, it's reasonable to think he's going to, things are going to click for him. I'll be honest with you. I was not expecting Olu to look as good as he did down the stretch. I thought this year was going to be a year where, maybe he gets some reps. There will be a lot of growing pains. Maybe he has a game or two where he looks decent, and you build on that. You spend the offseason lifting weights. No, look, he was good once he took over for Tyron Smith at the left tackle position. So got to feel good about Olu. John Simpson, again, look, Joe Douglas got plenty of criticism. I think a lot of it was justified. I've criticized Joe Douglas quite a bit. I think a lot of that was justified. John Simpson was a really good signing by Joe Douglas, though. And Joe Tippmann at the center position, and then Elijah Vera Tucker at right guard. A couple recent draft picks by the Jets, both of them looking pretty good. The one spot we don't have a starter for is right tackle. That's Morgan Moses. And Connor Hughes of SNY reported yesterday that it sounds like the Jets might be moving on from Moses. And I've kind of gone back and forth on Morgan Moses. Morgan Moses, really solid player and a great locker room guy, a guy who I wish the Jets had for more than 2 years. They had him in 2021, and they had him again in 2024. Outstanding guy, true professional, type of guy you need to have a good offensive line. But at the same time, I can't entirely get on the Jets for potentially moving on from Moses from the standpoint, 34 years old. And while his play is still pretty good, it's not as good as it used to be. Moses at one point was one of the most durable offensive linemen in the league. And now he's getting injured a lot. Now he's missing some time. His play's still pretty good, but it's not as good as it used to be. And as much as anything, you got to look at trajectory. One of the reasons I was kind of optimistic when the Jets signed, no, look, I'd be lying to you if I told you I thought it was a slam dunk signing. One reason I thought there was room for optimism when the Jets signed John Simpson a year ago was not that John Simpson had a track record of great play, but if you looked at his trajectory, he was clearly on an upward swing. And if that upward swing continued, there was a chance he could be a good player. That's what ended up happening. Moses is kind of the opposite. Great, really good track record. Maybe not great track record, but really good track record. But it's been going downhill. And if he continues on his current trajectory, there's a real chance that 2024 was the last good football he has. And I think that there's a good chance he's going to be available after the draft. If you get to a situation where you don't have a right guard after the draft, he's the type of guy that's usually available once you get into the later part of spring and early part of the summer. There are always guys veteran type guys who are just kind of looking to hang on, get one last 1-year contract. And Moses feels like the kind of guy who's going to be there in May, June, somewhere in that area, where if you get into an emergency situation where you're just not able to find anybody else this offseason, you can sign him. But Jets are looking for a right tackle. Now, look, that's better than we've been for a long time for the Jets, because normally we go into the offseason, we're looking for 3 guys, and we're looking for the guy who disappointed last year to turn things around. Jets' offensive line is in the best shape it's been in quite a while. It's one of the things that kind of flew under the radar with their offensive struggles, but their offense did not struggle because of the line, at least in terms of pass blocking. But that's a key point. And I think what the Jets want to find at the right tackle position is not just a quality player. And look, you obviously want someone who can protect the passer, because Jets are probably heading into the season with a guy who's going to be a question mark at the quarterback position. Maybe a rookie. My guess is more likely to be a veteran, but maybe a kind of a reclamation project, someone along the lines of a Justin Fields or something of that nature. You want to have a good pass blocking line in front of them. But Jets' run blocking was not as good as their pass blocking this past season. And I think you want to have a right tackle in an ideal world who can move people in the run game. Because if you get a good run blocking right tackle, you pair him next to Elijah Vera Tucker, who's a pretty good run blocker, and Joe Tippmann, who's mobile, who can move, who can hit blocks on the run. That's what sets you up that potentially sets you up to be able to run the ball effectively and open the holes Breece Hall needs to be effective, and maybe help Breece Hall increase those number of big runs. Maybe get closer to the 7 30-yard gains than the 3 30-yard gains, the 7 30-yard gains of 2023, than the 3 30-yard gains of 2024. And that's the type of thing that can help you complete the line, because across the board, you got guys who can pass block, but you don't really have a great run blocking unit. Now, part of it, again, will be the loss of Keith Carter, who's not my favorite offensive line coach, a guy I was critical of quite a bit. And if you watch the Jets last year on film, you saw a number of occasions on run plays where there was failure, and the failure looked in part because guys did not really understand their assignments. And that's something I think that can be attributed, at least in part, to coaching. So hopefully better offensive line coaching will play a role in this. But I think, look, we know the Jets are going to need to figure out the right tackle position. But beyond just figuring it out, one of the things they need to prioritize at that spot is run blocking. That's like the one thing the offensive line is lacking right now. There's a lot of pass blocking. And look, you don't want a guy who's a turnstile as a pass blocker. That's not going to help anybody. That's not going to help your quarterback. That's not going to help your passing game. But you definitely want to make sure you find somebody who's an effective physical type of run blocker. If we compare next to Elijah Vera-Tucker, and you maybe allow the Jets to run to the right side of the line, because I don't think the Jets are going to be able to run to the left side of the line as effectively with Fashanu and Simpson there. But that's okay, because the left side of the line, that's the blind side. Those are you're blocking the guys the quarterback can't see or aren't in the quarterback's line of vision. You want to prioritize pass blocking there. So maybe a little bit more focus on the run blocking there. So it's not just about the right tackle. It's about a certain type of right tackle that I think the Jets need a critical role, because Jets need to be able to run the ball as well. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, and send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow, we will plan to have our weekly mailbag show. Talk to you then.